was a record day on Wall Street. The S&P 500 and the NASDAQ both hitting new intraday highs and now closing at new record highs.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great America Show. You heard that correctly. It wasn't a joke. It's not April Fool's. Another record high for President Trump, second this week for the S&P and the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ closed at 20,273, up 105 points on the day. The S&P 500, 6,173, up 32 points on the day. A far different tone. The Marxist Democrats have been quiet. They've been silent about everything. Gas prices, the war in Gaza that's about to end, Iran, Russia, Ukraine, egg prices, the stock market. These are all things 2 months ago these people were going crazy about. They were telling us Donald Trump's getting us into World War III. Donald Trump's driving us into a recession. He's ruining this country. He doesn't know what he's doing with tariffs. Someone take the controls from him. Turns out they made the whole thing up. And I say this all with such a great smile on my face as a man who loves this country and wants it to do well, regardless of who the president is. Under Joe Biden, I was rooting for the country. Should Kamala have won, I would be rooting for the country because all of our fate depends on it. Our 401ks, our children, our grandchildren, our grandparents, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. It all depends on the country doing well. The Marxist Dems were so happy just a few short months ago that they can barely hold back their excitement that Donald Trump may be getting us into a recession. That he was going a little rogue, as they said, with the trade wars with all these countries. Take a listen. CNN just a few months ago.
As we come on the air, new warning signs for President Trump about the real-world impact of his shock and awe, move fast and break things, politics and policies. Just moments ago, U.S. stocks closing deep in the red, off to the worst start of the year since 2020, as inflation and Trump's trade war leave investors freaked out and consumers low on confidence, according to a new report out today.
You heard that, right? Move fast and break things. Trade war. You're not hearing trade wars anymore. You're not even hearing anything about it. Tariffs? What's a tariff? You're not hearing a darn thing about it. Inflation? He's driving inflation through the roof. That was CNN just a few months ago. They could barely hold back their excitement. But it wasn't just the fake news. It's the Marxist Dems as well. Take, for example, Pocahontas, Elizabeth Warren.
Comes in and basically starts the dumbest trade war in the history of this country. This is going to be about potentially millions of people losing their jobs. It's going to be about millions of people losing their savings, many of people losing their retirement security, and at the same time taking on even higher costs for everything they buy. So that's going to push us in potentially to foreclosures or people being pushed out of their apartments. You know, I remember this from 2008 and how long it took us to dig our way out. And to this day, there are families, there are communities that still haven't recovered. Recessions can be all those fancy charts and graphs, but at the end of the day, people feel them one person at a time, and they can be devastating.
To hear her even mutter the words dumb for a woman with a double-digit IQ, she's literally been wrong on every single economic issue she's ever spoken out about. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's either wrong on everything or she's lying about something. Could be both. It most likely is both. She lies and gets herself into a deeper hole by lying some more, kind of like Michael Cohen did. These people don't like America. They hate America. And she's one of them. And her, in conjunction with the mainstream media, is such a massive threat to democracy. There is no trade war, regardless of what she wants. It's Donald Trump balancing out unfair trade practices that have been done for 25 years. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, Barack Hussein Obama, W. Bush, if I hadn't said him yet, Joe Biden, trade deals. But it really started, the brunt of it, under Bill Clinton. offshoring just about everything he could in America to every other country for slave labor. And every other president since him has progressively gotten worse and worse and worse offshoring. So Donald Trump came in and he told us this is what he was going to do for months in his first term, tariffs, to try to level the playing field with these countries to stop taking advantage of us. It's not that they're taking advantage of America as a country. I think Donald Trump would be a little bit more privy to making something work if that were the case, because everyone takes advantage of America. Let's just be honest about it. We're the piggy bank of the world. Everyone takes advantage of us. Folks in Mexico come through our southern border with drugs and human trafficking as they please. Ukraine calls up, tells us they need another $1 billion. Everyone takes advantage of America. We are the rug mat of the world. And it's because of presidents like the past. So Donald Trump comes in and says, this is done. Those days are over. And the world melts down. Not the world, but the mainstream media, that world. The Marxist Dems, that world. So he's taking on this fight, Canada. She says the dumbest fight. But Senator Warren, is it a dumb fight when they're killing our American farmers in the Midwest? I know you don't care about them because they don't vote for you because they know you're a liar and your party's a bunch of liars and they're a threat to democracy. But it's not a trade war when Donald Trump is standing up for 400% product increase prices on our farmers that can't compete with Canada. There's nothing dumb about that because you're not one of these farmers out there who's getting killed. So let's just get that straight. So Canada today decided they wanted to act like fools, adding a tax on American tech. Donald Trump is not going to stand for it. He says, we don't need Canada. So effective immediately, any trade negotiations with Canada are off the table.
So Canada put a charge on some of our companies, and Canada's been a very difficult country to deal with over the years. We hear Canada, we have a great relationship with the people of Canada, but it's been very difficult. And they put a charge, and they were a little bit early. We found out about it. And we have all the cards. We have every single one. We don't want to do anything bad, but they have, economically, we have such power over Canada. I'd rather not use it, but they did something with our tech companies today trying to copy Europe. They copied Europe. It's not going to work out well for Europe either. And it's not going to work out well for Canada. They were foolish to do it. So I said, we're going to stop all negotiations with Canada right now until they straighten out their act. Okay? Is
there anything Canada can do to change your mind about this situation?
Well, no, they put a tax on companies that were American companies that they shouldn't, very severe tax. And I guess they could remove it. They will, but it doesn't matter to me. We have all the cards. We have all the cards. We do a lot of business with Canada, but relatively little. They do most of their businesses with us. And when you have that circumstance, you treat people better. They've had farmers that are getting like 300, 400, 200% in tariffs. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. We have cases, you don't read this and the people don't report, but they charge us 400% on some dairy products, 400%. Nobody writes that. And it's not fair to our farmers, and we've got to protect our farmers.
The demeanor of President Trump there should tell you all you need to know about where he stands with Canada. He doesn't really care. They've inflicted this wound on themselves. So now let's watch the mainstream media go out there and parade it that Donald Trump has started another trade war. Now, this happened about 1 o'clock this afternoon. The markets still rallied. You had the record close on the S&P. You had the record close on the NASDAQ. And the Dow Jones still ended up just over 400 points. So not a bad day for the Dow, which is rip-roaring now, up on the 1 year, up on the year to date. So the Democrats' frightened and scare there didn't work. It's what they've tried to do. So now Canada's got themselves into a pickle, and it's up to them to get themselves out. I wish I could tell you that was the only big news of the day. But before that even happened, a massive, massive case for the Supreme Court, who wrapped up their term this afternoon. They'll go off into summer vacation. I know it's nice. They don't have to work in the summers. They get to relax and get ready for their next term. But they did do some major things. And we're going to take all of it up with the very brilliant scholar mind, law mind, Professor William Jacobson of Cornell University. He's going to be joining us in just a few moments with his take on everything that's going on in this country, everything that's going on with the lawfare, and that the Supreme Court, with their massive cases, we'll go through a few of them just briefly. LGBTQ case, which Muslim plaintiffs brought a case against schools that they don't want their children indoctrinated and that they can opt out of these books in these classes. Supreme Court upholding those parents today, saying their children should not be subject to this, and they can no longer be subject to this. Another big case down in Texas, Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton, upholding a Texas law requiring websites with substantial sexual content to verify user ages before granting access to that content. A massive win for parents and protecting our children across this great country. But perhaps the bigger issues that the Supreme Court took issue with, I should say, is listing policies and lifting injunctions on which these Marxist rogue judges, in which we're going to talk about with Professor Jacobson in just a few moments, but lifting injunctions from lower courts on birthright citizenship, on funding for sanctuary cities, on suspending refugee settlement, on freezing unnecessary federal funding, and on stopping taxpayer-funded tranny surgeries. Pam Bondi addressed it in the Oval Office earlier this afternoon next to President Trump.
Americans are finally getting what they voted for. No longer will we have rogue judges striking down President Trump's policies across the entire nation. No longer. Today, in the 6-3 opinion, Justice Barrett correctly holds that the district court lacks authority to enter nationwide or universal injunctions. These lawless injunctions gave relief to everyone in the world instead of the parties before the court. As the Supreme Court held today, they turned district courts into the imperial judiciary. Active liberal judges have used these injunctions to block virtually all of President Trump's policies. To put this in perspective, there are 94 federal judicial districts. 5 of those districts throughout this country held 35 of the nationwide injunctions. Think about that. 94 districts and 35 out of the 40 opinions with nationwide injunctions came from 5 liberal districts in this country. No longer.
You heard her correctly. 94 districts and 5 of them gave rulings on 35 cases. It's good old-fashioned judge shopping by the Marxist Dems. President Trump, immediately after the Supreme Court hearing, laid out just how he plans to proceed with these liftings of these injunctions.
Thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore. That was meant for the babies of slaves. It wasn't meant for people trying to scam the system and come into the country on a vacation. This was, in fact, it was the same date, the exact same date, the end of the Civil War. It was meant for the babies of slaves, and it's so clean and so obvious. But this lets us go there and finally win that case, because hundreds of thousands of people are pouring into our country under birthright citizenship, and it wasn't meant for that reason. Was meant for the babies of slaves. So thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with these numerous policies and those that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis, including birthright citizenship, ending sanctuary city funding, suspending refugee resettlement, freezing unnecessary funding, stopping federal taxpayers from paying for transgender surgeries, and numerous other priorities of the American people.
and most importantly, making America great again. Folks, we're going to take a quick break here. On the other side of this break, we're going to be joined by Cornell University law professor William Jacobson. We're going to break all these cases down for you and figure out where we go from here and just how fast President Trump can start these proceedings with deportations and the ending of birthright citizenship. Can we get it passed? Stay with us. We're coming right back.
You're still looking good.
I'm still feeling good. You know, I've got all your MyPillow products. Mattress topper, bed sheets, MyPillows, towels, slippers, blankets.
I'm interrupted this commercial to do something I've never done before. Get 2 MyPillows absolutely free on orders of $100 or more. I can't do this forever, so get on board with this great sale today. Our best-selling 6-piece bath towel sets or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Our famous standard MyPillows only $14.98. Queens $18.98. King size only $1 more. Body pillows $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bed sheet sets. Any size, any color. So go to MyPillow.com or call that number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And when you spend $100 or more, get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
Professor Jacobson, as always, it's a delight to talk to you. Happy Friday. I'm sorry to pull you out of summer mode, but it was a massive day, as I just laid out for the audience here. The Supreme Court with a slew of rulings, but the overwhelming theme of it was a double bird to the Democrat Marxist judges who have tried to stifle this administration at every point along the way. We heard standing in 2020 like there was no tomorrow. It's like standing doesn't even exist anymore. Tell the audience, if you will, what happened today in the Supreme Court.
Well, there were several big decisions. There was a decision out of Montgomery County, Maryland, saying that parents have a right to opt their kids out of LGBTQ++ really programming in the school. Very interesting case. The lead plaintiffs were Muslim parents who didn't want their kids to have to sit through it, and the school district wouldn't let them opt out. Supreme Court reversed that, said they have a constitutional religious freedom right to opt out. There was another case out of Texas where the Supreme Court upheld a Texas law requiring age verification for pornography sites. Hugely popular measure, didn't cut them off, but just said you got to make sure it's not like 12-year-olds, okay? And so the Supreme Court ruled on that. But the one everybody's talking about is being called the birthright citizenship case, which actually wasn't about birthright citizenship. So it was a case where Donald Trump issued an executive order saying we, the federal government, will not accept papers, will not recognize claims to citizenship where the mother was not a citizen and neither was the father, or is here illegally, or were transitory, where the mother was transitory and the father's not a citizen. We're not going to recognize that. And there was a lawsuit and an injunction issued, a so-called universal injunction, where a single federal judge said nationwide, I'm going to enjoin this, and I'm going to force the federal government to recognize the concept of birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship is loosely based on the 14th Amendment that says any person subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, I'm paraphrasing obviously, and present here is a citizen. And there's a question, what does that mean? Does that mean that someone who's here illegally becomes a citizen, their kids? And that's how people have treated it for several decades, at least for almost a century. People have treated it that way. But there's never been a Supreme Court ruling that the children of illegal aliens are citizens. So they've kind of made it up as they went, the political system. And that was the issue that Trump was addressing. But that was not the issue that the Supreme Court decided. All they decided is, can a federal district court judge issue a universal injunction? And the nub of the ruling was no, that is not within the power of a single federal judge to issue a universal injunction, which binds people who aren't even before the court. They're not parties. They have no say in anything. They can't present their side of the story, and that the federal courts don't have the power to do that. And that's hugely, hugely important for the Trump administration, because both Trump 1.0 and now Trump 2.0 have really been hamstrung by these universal injunctions, because the Trump administration needs to win every single case. If the challengers find one judge out of 650 plus in the country who will issue a universal injunction, they win. So, and I remember this back in the first term. Trump won a lot of the immigration cases, but lost one or two. And therefore, it took him 2 years to get the case to the Supreme Court, and he ultimately won, but he'd lost 2 years of his term. So that was the issue, and that's the big ruling. There's a lot of nuances to that and consequences I'm happy to get into.
Yeah, I want to do that, but I have a short attention span here, Professor. I couldn't have got into Cornell if I had cheated on my SATs, so just bear with me a little bit here. You had mentioned the injunctions, right? And as I mentioned earlier, standing, right? In 2020, we heard out of every single court that Donald Trump went to, that his lawyers went to for election integrity, for election fraud, that they had no standing. I haven't heard that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't heard that one time from one of these Marxist Dem judges.
Well, I don't know if it's never happened this time around, but out of, I think, 400 cases, it's a rarity. I mean, normally when you go to federal court, the first thing the judge does is examine, do I even have jurisdiction here? Yeah. Do I have jurisdiction over it? Now, a lot of these immigration cases, the legislation divests the federal courts of jurisdiction. You've got to go to the immigration, and the judges just ignore that. And plus the issue of standing. And in fact, I think it was Justice Alito in a concurring decision today said, we really need to address this issue of standing. And we're not. In this decision, which was for Trump, we're not addressing the issue of standing, and we've got to clamp down on that. So you're absolutely right that this has not been a situation where the judges have exercised the extreme caution that they have when it was the other shoe on the other foot and people challenging the elections.
Sorry to go off on a tangent there, but that's just, it's so crazy that you know, that's what we saw in 2020. And you know what, if some of the judges would have had the intestinal fortitude, maybe things would have ended differently in 2020. I'm convinced of it. Going back to the birthright citizenship question, President Trump mentioning today that what it was really intended for was for children of slaves to be able to be citizens here after what was gone through. Why has it taken so long for us to get to this inception point where this is, 100 years, not exactly 100 years, but some years now in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure he's totally correct that it was only for the children of slaves. It was meant also to make sure that slaves themselves, freed slaves, were considered citizens of the United States. And in fact, I think that was probably the primary motivation, is that 1865, you have hundreds of thousands of freed slaves who are they citizens or are they not? And I think that's what it was mostly intended for, not just their children. There was a case which had held that the children of permanent, lawful, resident aliens are considered children. But there has never been a Supreme Court ruling that the children of people who are here illegally are citizens. And that's really a huge issue, because birthright citizenship is an incentive for people to come here illegally. You cross the border or you overstay your visa, and all of a sudden your kids are American citizens. There's a large tourism business. I think they call it birthright tourism from Asia, where people fly here, and there are travel companies that set it up, and they stay in a hotel in Los Angeles for last couple of months of pregnancy, and they give birth here, and they now have an American citizen child, and they fly back to wherever they came from. And is that really what we intended by this, that someone can fly to Los Angeles, stay a month or two, give birth, and now that child is a citizen? And that's the issue. And there's a lot of scholarship which has been denigrated, has been put down, saying this is not what it was intended to be. And if we look back at the history of the 14th Amendment, They did not intend this to happen. What the Supreme Court will do with it on the merits, I don't know. But the merits weren't before the Supreme Court now. So it was a very strange posture. We're talking about birthright citizenship, but we're not ruling on birthright citizenship. We're dealing with an injunction. So it was a very strange posture. At some point, they're going to get to the merits of it. I'm not sure what that point is.
And that's the one that scares the heck out of me, is what they're going to wind up doing there. To me, it's very black and white. I think it seems like to you, it's very black and white that this thing has just gone rogue. I mean, it's people who have no intention of becoming Americans. They don't care about America. They don't care about this country. They just care about getting that citizenship so they can work here, because it is the greatest country in the world, regardless of what anybody tells you or what anybody wants you to believe. This is the greatest country in the world. There is no place like it. The benefits we are afforded. You go to any other country, with maybe the exception of Canada, and you burn a flag there, your ass is grass. Yet in America, we tolerate this stuff. And I think we've tolerated it for far too long. So now that we have the question of birthright citizenship being allowed to be brought to a court, number one, what court do you believe that gets brought to? Does that go right to the Supreme Court, or does it have to go to another court first? Number one. Number two, what do you think the process looks like and the timeline?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I did hear reference today, I think it was by Pam Bondi, Attorney General, saying that this was going to be heard by the Supreme Court in the fall. I'm not familiar with that case. I don't know if it's the same case. It might be this case. Remember, what we were dealing with now was really a stay of putting a halt to a lower court injunction. That's all the Supreme Court ruled on. So it might be what she's referring to is that this case will be heard in the Supreme Court, this executive order, on the merits, but that won't be to the fall. I don't know more than what she said about that. So this will make its way in the normal course. It's a hugely important issue. The Supreme Court should rule on it. We should have a uniform national standard on what the 14th Amendment means. But we had this weird procedural thing where the Trump administration, and in hindsight, 2020 hindsight, it was a brilliant tactical move. They decided only to bring the procedural issue right now to the Supreme Court and not the merits issue. They've been proven right, but even if they've been proven wrong, it's not necessarily a bad strategy, but that was clearly their strategy. And the reason for the strategy is, as I mentioned, that they are being hamstrung, not just on birthright citizenship, but on a whole host of other issues by these universal injunctions. And they obviously viewed this, for whatever the reason, as the right case to bring to challenge those universal injunctions.
I'm going to tell you something that is just so mind-blowing to me. The great Lou Dobbs did not like attorneys. You were one of the few that he actually liked and respected, because let's be honest, it's a dime a dozen now. It's like people go to law school, wherever they're going to go to law school, to get the degree, to think they're going to make a lot of money. People don't realize is the majority of lawyers don't really make a lot of money. Some people get lucky. Some people are smart like you, and they make money because they're smart. But it seems that everyone these days is just, I'm going to become a lawyer and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go chase ambulances or whatever they decide they want to do. The funniest part about this all, Professor, is that these top lawyers for whatever, the Southern Poverty Law Center, whatever the heck, ACLU, whatever firm they're coming from, are getting beat by a man named Stephen Miller, who is not a lawyer. I mean, what does it tell you about these people?
Well, they have been very comfortable with a judiciary that has been favorably inclined towards them, and a media that's been favorably inclined towards them. And one of the reasons they hate Donald Trump so much is that he consistently beats them. And this is one where, let's put it in perspective. Are we in month 5 or 6 of his second term? We're only at the beginning. They've got 3.5 more years of this. He came into this, and his people came into this much better prepared than in 2016, in 2017 when he took office. I don't think he really knew what to do now. And the bureaucracy was able to take advantage of him in that way. James Comey at the FBI, they were really able to go. No, he came into this with an agenda. And while the Democrats have achieved some measure of delay, they haven't achieved a lot. I mean, we're going into, I think it's month 6. Somebody do the math for me.
July, yeah.
I'll have to do it on my fingers, but
me too.
but we're not that far into it, okay? And they've got 3 more years, solid 3 more years of this, and he's got a mostly favorable Supreme Court. They don't rule his way on everything, and people have been all over Amy Coney Barrett saying, she stabbed him in the back. But interestingly, she wrote the opinion today, and interestingly, Trump always stood by her publicly. When everybody was criticizing her, and I can't remember what it was about a month ago, everybody was all over her about siding with the liberals.
I think it had something to do with Wilmer Abrego Garcia, the guy who got
yes. She's a good person. And so and she came through this time, and she came through in one of the best ways. I mean, this is so perfect. She really, took a hammer to Ketanji Brown Jackson, okay? I mean, when I say she took a hammer, I mean, the whole internet is now laughing at Ketanji Brown Jackson. There were just some absolutely brilliant lines in her opinion. And one of them, which I'll just read because it's so great, she says, "We will not dwell on Justice Jackson's arguments, which is at odds with more than 2 centuries worth of precedent, not to mention the Constitution itself. We only observe this. Justice Jackson decries an imperial executive while embracing an imperial judiciary." And everybody's like standing up and cheering because that's exactly what it is. And there were several other lines where she went right after Jackson, didn't use the word stupid, didn't use the word ignorant, but used a whole bunch of words that basically said that. And really, that's what everybody's talking about. And the other interesting thing is, remember, this is a 6-3 decision. So there were 5 other justices who signed on to this opinion, knowing in it was multiple swipes at Justice Jackson. So, they could have just concurred in the result and not signed on to the opinion, but they signed on to the opinion. So the 6 conservatives on the court do not think very highly of Justice Jackson. In fact, I'm not even sure the 2 other liberals do, because Jackson wrote a dissent, which nobody joined in. Okay. Yeah. So Sotomayor wrote the main dissent, which was joined by Kagan and Jackson. And Jackson wrote her own dissent, which nobody joined her in. And her own dissent was completely political.
Wasn't it like 2 sentences or something?
No, it was long. It was long, but it could be boiled down to 2 sentences, which is, the sky is falling. It's the end of democracy.
Donald Trump's a threat to democracy.
And there were several other swipes. I mean, it was truly amazing, Barrett's opinion. And I think it made a laughingstock of Justice Jackson, because it's one thing for me to say such things or you to say such things, but when 6 of the Supreme Court justices basically call her a fool, untethered to legal doctrine, I think was one of the terms, again, paraphrasing, somebody who seems bothered by all this legalese. Okay.
Let me read that because I have it up in front of me. Justice Jackson skips over the part because analyzing the government statute involves boring legalese. Pretty much telling her she doesn't know how to read.
And telling that she's not concerned. It's all political. That, let's not get bogged down in the statutory language. Okay. This is the result we want. And, it's easy to laugh now. And fortunately, she's only 1 out of 9. But this is a prototype of a progressive judge. After the affirmative action case, which I think was maybe her first case that she was on, if not her first, then her second or her third, she didn't write, obviously, the majority decision, but she wrote a dissent. And I said to people, if you want to see what critical race theory looks like when it's adopted by a judge, read her dissent in the Students for Fair Admissions case. It is straight out of critical race theory textbooks. And this is what we have. Fortunately, she is hopefully for at least the next 3.5 years, the last Supreme Court justice who's going to engage in this. She's much worse than Sotomayor, who's very liberal. Kagan is liberal, but kind of can go with the flow a little bit. But Jackson is way out there, devoid and divorced from the American legal tradition in a way I don't think we've ever seen a justice on the Supreme Court.
You know what scares the heck out of me? And this is something I ponder about very often, and I don't know the right answer. I don't know the wrong answer, but Clarence Thomas, who's been one of the greatest champions on that Supreme Court in history, who's been attacked disgustingly by the Democrats for nonsense, is getting up there in age. And, it scares the heck out of me because you put another – by the way, I did the math while you were talking. It's 5 months and 7 days. So we're short of 6 months. But it scares the heck out of me knowing that he's getting up there in age, and Donald Trump's got I'm not going to do the math here, but 3 months, 3 years and 6 months and a few days left in office. And it's even less than that because you're not going to bring a judicial appointment after the election in November. So we'll call it 3 years. And then you got to worry about the possibility of the Democrats winning 4 years. So that puts you at a 7-year timetable, maybe another 4 years on top of that. It puts you at an 11-year timetable, worst case scenario for, some of these judges who are getting up there. And I'm not suggesting he's in bad health in any way, but it's things that I think you have to wonder in the back of your head. And if someone's going to wonder about it, I think Clarence Thomas himself is going to do it because he's that good of a man that he knows if the time is coming, if the Lord's calling for him or he wants to take some time and right back to his head, he's not going to put this country in a bad place, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I hope he lives to 100. And if he could live to 100 and be on the court the whole time, I would be thrilled. But it's the old Ruth Bader Ginsburg paradox that Democrats were urging her openly, please retire while we have the White House. Okay. And she didn't. She hung on too long and she died, and Donald Trump got to appoint her successor. And Democrats are furious about that. Do I worry about that? Sure. I mean, the first issue is not so much the next 3 years. It's, do Republicans retain the Senate? Because if they don't, then you might have hard time getting a proper replacement confirmed. Nobody can predict to a certainty. It does look highly likely that Republicans will retain the Senate, not necessarily the House, but the Senate. Very likely. But that's a risk. You never know. You never know what happens. And so that is the risk number one. You could make an argument that Trump really has a year and a half, not 3 years.
Yeah.
But again, as we look at the Senate map now, it seems highly likely Republicans will retain at least 50 seats, because then you have the vice president do the tiebreaker. Okay? And so, and that's an issue. I mean, I would hate to see him go, but I would also hate to see him go, and we can't confirm an equivalent of Clarence Thomas. There are some very high profile, very good appeals court judges who I think would be a proper replacement. The most clear one that everybody talks about is James Ho out of the Fifth Circuit. And I think he is probably the leading likelihood but Alito's getting up there in years, Thomas getting up there in years.
Let's go with Sotomayor and Kagan as well. So,
Sotomayor, I think more so than Kagan. Kagan's much younger.
He's aged horribly, I have to say. Sotomayor.
Yeah, she is legit not in good health. I mean, I think that's pretty well known. But I don't know that she's an imminent,
No. I'm not suggesting that Clarence Thomas is either. I'm just, looking at the timetable of what it is. And like I said, he is an American patriot, that man. A good friend.
I mean, he's 77 years old. So by the actuarial tables, by the mortality tables, he should have, at least 5 years left. Hopefully, like I said, he's got 20. But, that'll be his decision. And, somebody like that who's very proud of what he's accomplished, very proud to be in the position he's on, very proud to be able to write the decisions he writes. He's not that often writing the majority decision, but he writes great concurring decisions. Yeah. He's probably having the time of his life right now, enjoying what's going on. And so, I'd hate to see him go. Alito, I'm not sure how old Alito is. I think about the same as Thomas. Yeah. So we've got a couple of justices there who are getting on in age, and they happen to be the two best justices on the court. Okay. Barrett wrote a good decision this time. Kavanaugh can sometimes be good, sometimes not. Same with Gorsuch. And obviously we know about the chief. You lose these two people and you do not replace them with equivalents.
Yeah.
And that's a real blow to the court.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The truth of the matter is that age is just a number. I mean, the great Lou Dobbs passed away a few months short of his 79th birthday, and you never know what's going to happen.
You never know.
You know, one day it's good, and then 3 days later you're told that something is going to happen, and that person's only there. So, you know, it's a terrible thing. You'd mentioned Ginsburg. Lou Dobbs used to say to me all the time, pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered, and that's exactly a case of the
hung on too long.
But good for her. I'm glad she stood her ground and didn't cave like Joe Biden did.
I appreciate her principled stand. And so does Amy Coney Barrett.
Yeah. You know what? We'd mentioned, I'm not entirely sure she's much different than her. But I'm going to hold out hope and reserve that. There are some things in Amy's life that make me a little nervous that she's going to rule on birthright citizenship. I believe all of her kids are adopted from foreign nations. So I don't know if that plays a role in it, but it sits in the back of my head that there's a possibility she could have a soft spot for immigrants in the country.
Well, there's nothing to prevent an immigrant from gaining citizenship. The question is whether if they are here or if their parents are here illegally, they automatically gain it by virtue of their birth. Nothing to prevent an adopted immigrant child from gaining citizenship, regardless of how this ruling turns out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and we got to just hope and pray. The other thing that was big in this was the funding for sanctuary cities. So imagine that a court came and said, well, Donald Trump, you can't cut funding to this city because they want to harbor illegals. Well, on the flip side, who says that the American people have to pay for illegals to be living in New York or Chicago or wherever the heck they want to live? I don't want to pay for it. You don't want to pay for it. If someone wants to pay for it, let that city pay for it, and we deduct it out of their federal funding. How is that even something that gets to the national level?
Yeah, well, I think the issue there in a lot of these funding cases is if there is legislation which requires certain funding be provided, can the president on his own just terminate it? And that's typically the arguments, is that he doesn't have a choice as president, that this funding was provided by the Congress and the Congress mandated it. Whether that's accurate or not, courts will decide, but that's the argument, is that it's already been funded and you can't interrupt something that's already been funded. But that doesn't mean can't cut off future funding.
I hear every day about the products you all wish MyPillow carried. Well, guess what? We probably do. Slippers, bathrobes, pet beds, blankets, mattresses, sleepwear, loungewear, duvets, comforters, pot holders, aprons, oven mitts, and so much more. And they're all on sale. For example, get our best-selling standard MyPillows for only $14.98. Body pillows, $29.98. 6-piece bath towels or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And I've never done this before. When you spend $100 or more, you're going to get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
Going back to it's just in my head now, Stephen Miller, we'd spoken about a little bit, and how well prepared this Trump administration was. I had the feeling that this is how it was going to be, but I can almost bet you any amount of money in the world that on January 21st of 2021, Stephen Miller was at the drawing board figuring out how they're going to do things. And you had mentioned we're only five months and 7 days in, and they've already managed to get rulings on being able to proceed forward with lawsuits on key things that President Trump ran on: sanctuary city funding, birthright citizenship, suspending refugee resettlement, unnecessary freezing of unnecessary federal funding, stop the taxpayer-funded slush funds, parents being able to pull their kids out of LGBTQ programs. This is just 5 months and 7 days in. It scares the heck out of me, but in a good way, that they were able to accomplish this much in 5 months that they couldn't get through in 4 years last term in 2016.
Yeah, I think that's important. One thing people need to keep in mind is the Supreme Court ruling doesn't mean that the federal judiciary is going to go along with it. There are openings in the decision. This decision said you can't issue universal injunctions. You have to tailor the injunction to providing the remedies for these plaintiffs, but also dangled out there, which also came out in oral argument, that maybe the way to go is through class actions, not universal injunctions. So I think what you're going to see, and I've read someplace they've already refiled in one of these cases, what you're going to see are federal judges being very aggressive in granting class certification, accomplishing the rough equivalent of a universal injunction by another means. And I have no doubt that that will happen. So nobody should think that just because the Supreme Court ruled this way, all of a sudden, all the problems are solved. It's just a major problem has been removed, and the alternative procedures are much more cumbersome and more subject to review than these universal injunctions.
I'd go even a step further than you, that this has probably fired up these Marxist judges even more to make even crazier decisions, because they know that they're losing on every direction. Polling shows overwhelmingly. The Supreme Court shows overwhelmingly. All across the board, these people are losing, and they're losing, Professor, in one very key spot. It's the court of public opinion, and that's the court, I think, that matters most in the grand scheme of things. It was the court that mattered most back in November when Donald Trump won the popular vote of this country. What's stopping the Republicans from doing the same thing and going judge shopping? Why don't they follow their lawsuits down in Texas somewhere, or down in a very favorable district in Florida somewhere, or somewhere in Missouri? What's stopping the Republicans from doing that?
Well, they did that during the Biden administration, that not with the volume that you're seeing now. There was, in the New York Times of all places, in late November 2024, they ran a story about the organizing efforts for lawfare against the Trump campaign. Yeah. And I think I'm remembering their statistics correctly. They had lined up over 800 lawyers to participate in this, and over 40 groups. And they were already setting up trainings and setting up programs to find plaintiffs who have standing. Okay. And so this was a very highly organized effort to use lawfare to thwart the will of the American people. And unfortunately, some federal judges have brought that attitude forward. I should say, not all of them. We've gotten some good rulings, and even rulings where you lose. It's one thing to lose a ruling. It's another thing to lose a ruling where you feel the judge has been manipulative, where the judge has done things in a way that suggests the judge is not disinterested. And that's part of the problem here. The use of temporary restraining orders by a lot of these judges has looked very manipulative, because a temporary restraining order, as a general matter, there are some exceptions, as a general matter is not appealable. So it's as opposed to a preliminary injunction, a longer term injunction. A temporary restraining order is basically somebody comes into court and says, if you don't do this right now, the world is going to end for me. Okay. And you can't even wait a week. You can't wait 2 weeks. I need relief immediately. And in a lot of these cases, that's just not been true. I remember there was one of the first cases in early February out of New York City, Southern District of New York,
of course,
involving which Treasury officials could have access to Treasury payment systems, since they were working with Doge, with, at the time, Elon Musk's people. And they went into court on a Friday night at 10 p.m., knowing that in the Southern District of New York, there's an emergency duty judge. So you know which judge you're going to get if you file at 10 p.m., whereas if you file at 4 p.m., you get a random assignment. It's not literally random, but you don't know who you're going to get. Yeah. So they knew who they get. And that judge issued an injunction at 1 a.m. on a Saturday without even giving the government a chance to be heard and argue against it. And he essentially decapitated the Treasury Department. By the following Tuesday, another judge pretty much reversed him. Yeah. But that's what you've gotten. And that leaves a very sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. And at the end of the day, I think the credibility and trustworthiness of the judiciary has been severely damaged, not because 600 judges have gone rogue, but enough, might only be 20, enough have gone rogue that it's infected the whole system.
Yeah, and some of those judges you described, it sounds exactly like every single case that Donald Trump was involved in the lawfare against him for the last 4 years, with the exception of one, and that was Judge Eileen Cannon down in Florida, who was the only person with the courage to stand up to the atrocities that the Democrats are bringing upon him. You had that judge you mentioned in New York, Judge Juan Merchan. His daughter was fundraising $8 million for Kamala Harris. This isn't hyperbole. This is factual things. And you have judges who were clearly complicit. You couldn't get a fair shot. And they're just railroading this man, perp walking him, convicted felon this, convicted felon that, while these people are on the payrolls and their family members are on the payrolls of the Democratic Party. The corruption that we saw in America during that time is one that I hope we never see again, both Republicans and Democrats. Going back to a point you made, the problem I think I see is that the Democrats are smarter when it comes to being vindictive, maniacal people. The Republicans don't have an ACLU. The Republicans don't have a Southern Poverty Law Center. We have things like Judicial Watch, who do a great job, but they're not about lawfare. They're about going out and suing for things that are atrocities, things that are going wrong. We don't have the funding. We don't have the lawyers. We don't have any of the resources that these Democrats have because these people don't care. They hate Donald Trump so much that they'd go stand in front of a train track and kill themselves if you told them that it would make Donald Trump disappear. It's a mental health crisis, in my opinion, worse than anything.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge difference. The liberal activist lawfare system is so enormous relative to the conservative side. I mean, it's not even close. It's not even close. They have all these groups, ACLU, SPLC, literally probably 100 different groups who are very well funded, who are very well staffed, and who exist to bring litigation. There's just no comparison. There is no real equivalent on the right. There are groups that do litigation on the right. You mentioned Judicial Watch, there's Pacific Legal, we do some at Equal Protection Project, but we're minuscule compared to the infrastructure and the ecosystem on the left. And part of that is because leftist billionaires have invested in that system. Yep. George Soros has invested in that system. Yep. He knows that if you create these groups and you give them enough money that they're self-sustaining, you will create a political force. And it's worked. We should acknowledge it's largely worked. The problem that they have is the American people voted for the person, voted them out. Okay. But that infrastructure is truly massive. They have the ability the day after Trump does something to be in 3 different courts the next day. The right does not have that ability.
No, it's because you know why there's not very many people who are like you who are willing to put everything on the line to come out and speak in truth, justice, in the American way. They're terrified. Donald Trump couldn't find a dang lawyer who would represent him in any of his cases because of the retribution these people did. What they do to anyone who is associated with Donald Trump. You go down the list of people, Rudy Giuliani, an elderly man, they tried to ruin this man's life. Peter Navarro, they put in jail. It's a good thing that Peter Navarro is a tough guy, so it didn't matter. Steve Bannon, they put in jail. Roger Stone, they tried to put in jail. Anybody who associated themselves with Donald Trump, they ran. So I don't even know, Professor, if I can blame your people in your profession for having to stay away from him. Is it worth ruining everything I have? Is it worth losing my wife, my kids, my family to stand up? It's a question I think that you really probably have to ponder about and say. And it's so sick that we came to that point in this country is you have lawyers out there defending some of the worst people possible. P. Diddy's got lawyers right now who will probably get higher profile clients after they're done representing him. Yet Donald Trump couldn't get anybody to represent him if he paid billions of dollars. And that's the problem. Do you see that changing now in America, that it's become a lot more mainstream to support Donald Trump?
Maybe temporarily. I don't think there's been a long-term change. I don't think so. I mean, there was an organized Democrat effort organized by one of their worst operatives, David Brock. And this is public. This is not like they announced it, okay? They created a project to try to get Republican lawyers who represented Republicans in the election disputes disbarred, okay? And an organized effort to file bar complaints against people. I mean, this was, again, not me saying it. They were proud of this, that this is what they were going to do. I think the term was, they wanted to make Republican lawyers toxic in their communities. So you don't see the reverse happening. You don't see that. And in a few cases, a small number of cases, they were actually successful, but they only need to be successful once or twice to scare away 1,000 Republican lawyers.
Yeah, it's so sad that this is the inception point that we've come into in this country. Before we wrap up, and I know we went so over time, but I can probably talk to you for another 2 hours, maybe 3. You bring such a fascinating insight. And to the audience, I don't know who Professor William Jacobson voted for. I've never even asked him. He could have voted for Kamala Harris for all I know. But it's not what matters. What matters is the fact that he's here speaking, like I say, truth, justice, in the American way, which is so important. And it's something that we've all been so deprived of for the last 10 years, really, because that's when the problems against Donald Trump started. They started spying on this man in 2015 when he decided he was going to come down the escalator and beat out 16 incumbent Republicans with a baseball bat, metaphorically, of course. And it's only been uphill from there. You know, they've tried to dismantle this man at every point. Another record stock market closed today for the NASDAQ and the S&P. 3 months ago, they were cheering for this thing to crash. It's so sick. You'd mentioned temporarily that you think that the lawfare will stop and people will be able to defend what's right. What is your outlook going forward for the Trump administration? As we mentioned, we've got 3.5 years, more than 3.5 years left for him to get his agenda through, which includes building a border wall, securing this border, which is for the first time we're seeing a negative import of immigrants in this country. It seems he's got this thing on track and it's steaming. Do you see him going full force ahead and everything turning out good for him and the administration in this country?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it and say he's built tremendous momentum. It wasn't a smooth road, okay, but he's got a lot of momentum. If you look at, the stock market is a barometer of things, and it's always a little risky to do that, but, it's at all-time highs after having dropped when he announced the tariffs. Everybody panicked. If you look at what's happened in the Middle East, he seems to have a lot of momentum. He made the right call on Iran. And he had a lot of opposition from some pundits in the conservative world, but not from the base. You heard a lot of people about, you're going to splinter the base. Well, every single poll I've seen says that something like 90 to 95% of people who self-identify as MAGA Republicans supported the bombing of Iran. Okay, he knew the base better than some of these big pundits knew the base. And, he's got a lot of momentum there. Of course, he's got a lot of momentum on the economy, with NATO, you have to look at where he is 5 months and 7 days into his second term and say, he's on track to do amazing things. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, we all know that, and we can't predict that. But barring something unforeseen happening, I think he's going to be extraordinarily popular. He's way ahead in favorability and in popularity, favorable versus unfavorable. I think he's up, depending on the poll, several points, which is rare. Okay.
We use Rasmussen on this show, Professor.
Yeah. I mean, and, the Rasmussen poll, I think for the first time in its history, found right track, that a majority of people think we're on the right track. Okay. And that's a different measure than favorability. Do you like the person who you're going to vote? Is the country fundamentally on the right track?
Yeah.
And it actually shocked me when I heard that you've never had 50% plus one say it's on the right track. I would have thought you would have had that. But so I think he's got tremendous momentum, no sign of slowing down. Hasn't won the immigration battle, but he's won, hasn't won the immigration war, but he's won a huge battle, which is the southern border is under control. I mean, the notion that we have zero gotaways or getaways, people being captured on the border and shipped to the interior of the country, zero in May, unheard of, versus 160,000 a year ago under Biden in 1 month. So he's gone a long way. He's gone a long way. It's really turning out to be a lot more productive than I think anybody could have predicted.
And he's so focused, even on the Iran thing. You had the split, and You know, Tucker Carlson, I speak to him very often. He's a good friend of mine. I don't think Tucker Carlson came out here to make Donald Trump look bad and say this, this, and this. All these people, I believe, are looking out for the best interests of Donald Trump, and they don't want Donald Trump to be the next George W. Bush. And Donald Trump didn't want to be the next George W. Bush, and he's not going to be the next George W. Bush with going into Iraq with no WMDs. And some discourse in the party is good. For people to agree on everything, to my opinion, is unhealthy. So you had a little bump in the road, and you said a rough road, smooth seas never made a skilled sailor. So, you know, you have some discourse. We're not going to agree 100% on everything, but if we're 90% of the way there, I think that puts us in a good position. Donald Trump did wind up being right. I was skeptical about going in and bombing Iran myself, and I've said it on the show, and I came out a week later and I said I was wrong. That's what's important is we identify, we make a, because I don't like being in the middle of something. I don't like saying, well, he could do this or that. I like taking a position. If I'm wrong, I correct myself. If I'm right, even better. So he did wind up being right about that, and I am happy for it because it makes America a safer place right now. I want to give you some time before we wrap up to talk about your project, aside from being a Cornell University law professor, the Equal Protection Project, and what you're doing. You can go to equalprotect.org to look at what Professor William Jacobson is doing to donate there, because it is important. These things aren't multi-million-dollar operations. These are small money operations that rely on people like us to make donations. If you will, tell the audience maybe what you're working on right now or what you guys are up to.
Sure. Equalprotect.org is the website. It's part of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, which is a nonprofit 501c3. So donations are tax deductible. And what we do at EPP is we bring legal challenges to discrimination done in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have challenged over 100 colleges and universities with regard to over 400 discriminatory programs. And we're branching out. We've also done it against other entities, not just colleges and universities. And we've, accomplished a lot. We have over 75 wins. We might have more than that. It's not always easy to tell when you've won or when you haven't, but we've done productive stuff. We're very small. We certainly appreciate any support we can get. We don't have George Soros behind us. Every dollar counts, and we try to be very frugal and very careful with donor money. And we try to get results. And we have so far in 2 years, like I said, only 2 years, we've brought a tremendous number of cases with tremendous results. So please come by and visit equalprotect.org.
You heard the professor, equalprotect.org. And folks, we don't promote anything on this show that we don't partake in ourselves. If you don't believe what we're saying, go to the website, equalprotect.org, and see exactly what they are working on. Don't take our word for it. Professor William Jacobson, it's always a delight to talk to you. Like I said, I think your dog is barking. He's hungry, he wants some dinner. So we're going to let you go. We appreciate you joining us on this very, very monumental Friday in America.
Great. Thanks for having me on again. Always happy to come back.
A big thanks to Professor William Jacobson for joining us on this Friday night here on the Great America Show. Folks, the website, once again, equalprotect.org. We invite you to go check out all the great work that he's doing with his 501c3. I hope you all have a great weekend, and we hope to see you back here Monday, same time, same place. We'll be here waiting for you. Have a great weekend. As I said, be safe. Monday, you have a meeting with me, 6 p.m. here on the Great America Show. Until then, folks, may God bless you, may God bless America, and may God bless the great Lou Dobbs. Have a great weekend.